The crowd in the saloon fell silent as Willow Hayes pushed open the swinging doors, her eyes scanning the room for an empty table. The whispers started immediately, like a rattlesnake's warning before the strike. Provo, Utah Territory, 1879 was supposed to be her fresh start, but the past had a way of outrunning even the fastest horses. "That's her," someone muttered. "The woman who worked at Madame Rosa's in Denver." Willow kept her chin high as she moved through the room. She'd never actually been one of Madame Rosa's girls. She'd been the piano player and occasional bartender at the notorious brothel, but rumors didn't care for such distinctions. After 3 years of saving every penny, she'd purchased land just outside of town, determined to build a respectable life for herself. "Shameful," a woman in a high-necked dress hissed to her companion. "My husband says she tried to seduce half the men in Denver." Willow's fingers curled into fists at her sides. She'd learned long ago that defending herself only made things worse. A woman alone was suspect enough. A woman with her history was already condemned. Blake Grayson watched the scene unfold from his corner table. As the owner of the largest cattle operation in the territory, he was accustomed to being noticed. But today all eyes were on the slender woman in the modest blue dress. He'd heard the gossip about the new arrival in town, but the look of quiet dignity on her face as she weathered the stares told him more than any rumor. When the barkeep refused to serve her with a curt, "We don't serve your kind here," Blake had seen enough. "Tom," he called to the barkeep, his voice carrying easily across the room. "The lady will have whatever she wants. Put it on my tab." The room fell silent again, all eyes turning to Blake. Willow turned too, her gaze meeting his, surprise and wariness mingling in her expression. "Mr. Grayson," Tom sputtered, "you don't understand." This woman, Blake, rose to his full height, adjusting his hat as he moved across the room with the easy confidence of a man who knew his worth. He stopped beside Willow and gestured to the empty chair at his table. "Miss Hayes, would you join me?" he asked, ignoring the gasps and murmurs around them. Willow hesitated, studying the tall cowboy with suspicion. "I don't need charity, Mr. Grayson." "It's not charity to enjoy the company of a new neighbor," he replied. "Unless you'd prefer to dine alone while these vultures continue to circle." A hint of a smile touched her lips. "When you put it that way." As they settled at his table, Mrs. Eleanor Pritchard, the self-appointed moral guardian of Provo, approached with righteous indignation radiating from her tightly corseted frame. "Mr. Grayson, I feel obliged to inform you about this woman's reputation," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "She worked at a house of ill repute in Denver." "Surely a man of your standing, Mrs. Pritchard," Blake interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "I appreciate your concern, but I make my own judgments about people." "But she's a woman trying to enjoy a meal in peace," he finished. Then he looked up at Willow, his eyes warm with something she couldn't name. "And I choose you as my dining companion this evening." The conviction in his voice silenced the entire room. Mrs. Pritchard's face flushed red as she retreated, and Willow felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the feeling of being defended rather than condemned. "Why would you do that?" she asked quietly once the waitress had brought their food, her voice barely above a whisper. Blake cut into his steak, considering his words carefully. "Because 15 years ago, I was the son of a drunk who everyone said would end up swinging from a rope. People aren't always what rumors make them out to be." Willow studied him, this unlikely ally in a town full of enemies. "Thank you," she said simply. "Don't thank me yet," he replied with a grin that transformed his serious face. "Wait until you've tasted my conversation. I've been told it's duller than watching fence posts age." For the first time in months, Willow laughed, the sound drawing more stares, but for once she didn't care. As the afternoon light filtered through the dusty windows, they talked of neutral things: the weather, the town, her small plot of land where she hoped to grow vegetables and perhaps raise chickens. What neither of them realized was that this chance meeting would change both their lives in ways they couldn't possibly imagine. Willow walked briskly along Provo's main street the next morning, her basket filled with seeds and farming tools from the general store. She'd spent nearly all her remaining money on supplies for her small farm, determined to make the rocky soil yield enough to sustain her through the coming seasons. "Morning, Miss Hayes," called a cheerful voice. Willow turned to see Sally Winters, the young seamstress who had sold her fabric the previous week, one of the few people in town who treated her with basic courtesy. "Good morning, Sally," Willow replied, grateful for the friendly face. "I heard about what happened at the saloon yesterday," Sally said, lowering her voice. "Mr. Grayson standing up for you like that. Half the women in town are green with envy." "It was nothing," Willow insisted. "He was simply being kind." "Blake Grayson isn't known for random acts of kindness," Sally replied with a knowing look. "He's fair and respected, but he keeps to himself mostly. Has ever since his wife died 5 years back." Willow felt a pang of sympathy. "I didn't know he was a widower." "Sarah was thrown from her horse," Sally explained. "Hit her head on a rock. Blake was out on a cattle drive when it happened. Folks say he's never forgiven himself for not being there." Before Willow could respond, the rumble of hooves drew their attention. A wagon approached, driven by the man himself. Blake tipped his hat as he pulled to a stop beside them. "Miss Hayes," he greeted, his deep voice carrying a warmth that seemed reserved for her. "Miss Winters, Mr. Grayson," they replied in unison, "headed back to your place." He asked Willow, eyeing her heavy basket. "I'm going that direction. Could offer you a ride if you're of a mind to accept." Aware of the curious stares from passers-by, Willow hesitated. "I wouldn't want to trouble you." "No trouble," he assured her. "Besides, I wanted to speak with you about your land. That north section you're planning to farm has poor drainage. I might have some suggestions if you're interested." Sally nudged Willow gently. "You'd be foolish to refuse advice from the best rancher in the territory." With a small nod, Willow accepted his hand and climbed onto the wagon seat beside him. As they left town, she felt the weight of dozens of eyes watching them go, no doubt already spinning new tales about the fallen woman and the respectable rancher. "You shouldn't have done that," she said once they were beyond the town limits. "Your reputation is sturdy enough to withstand a wagon ride with a neighbor," he finished. He glanced at her, his expression serious beneath the shadow of his hat. "I meant what I said about your land, though. That north section floods every spring. You do better planting on the eastern slope." Surprised by his genuine concern, Willow studied him more carefully. Blake Grayson wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about his weathered face, with its strong jaw and lines that spoke of both laughter and hardship. His eyes were the color of the sky just before dusk, not quite blue, not quite gray. "Why are you helping me?" she asked directly. He kept his gaze on the road ahead. "Everyone deserves a fresh start, Miss Hayes. This territory was built on second chances. Most people in town would disagree with you about my deserving one." "Most people in town haven't had to fight their way back from rock bottom," he replied. "I have. Makes a man see things differently." They fell into comfortable silence until they reached the small cabin she'd purchased. It was little more than a shack with a leaking roof and weathered walls, but it was hers, the first thing she'd ever truly owned. Blake helped her down from the wagon and carried her basket to the porch. "I've got some spare lumber at my ranch," he said, eyeing the sagging roof. "Could bring it by tomorrow, help you patch that up before the next rain." "Mr. Grayson, Blake," he corrected gently. "Blake," she amended. "I appreciate your kindness, but I don't accept charity." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "It's not charity between neighbors. It's common sense. Besides, you can pay me back." "How? I have very little money left. I'm looking for someone to help with the accounts at my ranch. My foreman tries, but numbers aren't his strong suit. I heard you worked as a bookkeeper before." He trailed off, clearly trying to avoid mentioning her time at Madame Rosa's. Willow felt a flicker of hope. "Yes, I did the books at my previous place of employment." "Perfect. You help me make sense of my ledgers, I'll help you fix this roof. Seems fair to me." She wanted to refuse, to prove she could make it on her own, but practicality won out. The roof wouldn't last another heavy rain, and the opportunity for respectable work was too precious to reject out of pride. "All right," she agreed, "but I work for what I get. No special treatment." Wouldn't dream of it, he replied, the smile reaching his eyes this time. I'll be by tomorrow morning. Best get those seeds in the ground on the east side today if you can. Weather's turning perfect for planting. As he climbed back into his wagon, Willow called out impulsively, "Why did you really invite me to your table yesterday?" Blake paused, then answered with unexpected honesty. "Because I recognized the look in your eyes. It's the same one I see in the mirror some days, someone fighting not to be defined by their worst mistakes." With that, he clicked to his horses and drove away, leaving Willow standing on her porch with the strange feeling that her life in Provo had just taken an unexpected turn. True to his word, Blake arrived the next morning with a wagon loaded with lumber, tools, and a young ranch hand introduced as Timmy. While Timmy unloaded supplies, Blake showed Willow the ledgers he'd brought for her to review. "It's a mess, I warn you," he said, running a hand through his dark hair. "I'm better with cattle than columns." Willow opened the leather-bound book and immediately saw the problem. Expenses and income were recorded haphazardly, with no clear system for tracking either. "This will take some time to organize," she said, already mentally planning a new accounting system. "Take whatever time you need. I'll be up on that roof most of the day." As Blake and Timmy worked on the cabin, Willow sat at her small table, losing herself in the familiar comfort of numbers. By midday, she had created a new ledger with proper columns and entries, transferring information from his chaotic records into an organized system. The sound of hammering stopped, and Blake appeared in the doorway, his shirt damp with sweat. "Mind if we break for lunch?" Brought some food from the ranch. They ate on the porch, a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried beef, while Timmy enthusiastically described life on the Grayson ranch to Willow. "Mr. Grayson's got the finest cattle operation in 3 territories," the young man boasted. "And he treats his men fair, not like some ranchers." Blake looked embarrassed by the praise. "Timmy exaggerates, but we do all right." "He's being modest, miss," Timmy continued. "Mr. Grayson's introduced new breeding stock that's changing ranching around these parts. And he pays for schooling for any ranch hand wanting to learn reading or figures." Willow raised an eyebrow. "That's unusually progressive," Blake shrugged. "Can't expect a man to improve his station without the tools to do so." "Blake was the one who taught me my letters," Timmy added proudly. "I came to him not knowing how to write my own name, and now I can read the newspaper front to back." Something warm unfurled in Willow's chest as she watched Blake's embarrassed reaction to Timmy's admiration. This was not a man seeking to create obligation or demand gratitude. This was simply who he was. After lunch, they returned to their respective tasks. By late afternoon, the roof was mended, and Willow had created a comprehensive accounting system that would serve the ranch's needs far better than the previous hodgepodge of records. "This is remarkable," Blake said as she explained the new system. "You have a real talent for this." "It's just practice," she replied modestly. "I've been keeping books since I was 16. Would you consider coming out to the ranch once a week to help maintain this?" "I'd pay you fairly, of course." The offer was tempting not just for the money, but for the chance to do respectable work, yet Willow hesitated. "The people in town already talk. If I start visiting your ranch regularly," Blake's expression hardened slightly. "I don't much care what people say about me, Miss Hayes. But I care what they say about you," she admitted. "You've been kind when no one else would be. I don't want to repay that by damaging your standing in the community." His features softened. "How about this, you come on Sundays after church? My foreman brings his wife and children for Sunday dinner anyway. No one could gossip about impropriety with a house full of people." Willow smiled at his solution. "That sounds reasonable." As Blake and Timmy prepared to leave, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. "Storm's coming," Blake observed. "Roof's fixed just in time." "Thanks to you," Willow said softly. "Thanks to us," he corrected. "Your bookkeeping is worth far more than a few hours of carpentry." As they stood on the porch, watching the approaching storm, Willow felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. For the first time since arriving in Provo, she didn't feel completely alone. "See you Sunday then?" Blake asked, settling his hat on his head. "Sunday," she confirmed. As she watched them drive away, fat raindrops began to fall, but the new roof held firm against the gathering storm. That night, as rain drummed steadily overhead, Willow wrote in her journal by lamplight, recording the unexpected turn her life had taken. She was cautious by nature, trained by harsh experience not to trust too quickly, but there was something about Blake Grayson that made her want to believe in second chances. Sunday arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures. Willow rose early, donning her best dress, a deep green cotton with minimal embellishments that she'd sewn herself. She decided to attend church services before heading to the Grayson Ranch, knowing that regular church attendance was an essential step toward rebuilding her reputation. The small church was nearly full when she slipped into a back pew. Heads turned, whispers followed, but she kept her eyes fixed forward. When Blake entered with his foreman's family a few minutes later, he spotted her immediately. To her surprise, he nodded politely to those he passed and slid into the pew beside her. "Good morning," he whispered as the organ began to play. "You don't need to sit with me," she whispered back. "People are staring. Let them," he replied simply. "I always sit in the back anyway. Best view of the exits in case the sermon runs long." The small joke made her smile despite her nervousness. Throughout the service, she was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the faint scent of soap and leather. The way his large frame made the pew seem smaller, the respectful attention he gave to the preacher's words. When the service ended, Blake introduced her to his foreman, James Cooper, and James's wife, Martha, and their 3 children, 10-year-old William, 8-year-old Emma, and 5-year-old Daniel. Martha's friendly greeting suggested that Blake had already spoken to them about Willow's upcoming visits to the ranch. "We're so pleased you'll be joining us for Sunday dinners," Martha said warmly. "The children and I get terribly outnumbered by all the men at the ranch." As they stepped outside the church, Mrs. Pritchard approached, her pinched expression suggesting she was preparing for another public confrontation. But before she could speak, Blake smoothly addressed her. "Mrs. Pritchard, I was just telling Miss Hayes how your committee raised enough funds to repair the church roof. Quite an accomplishment." Momentarily diverted by the compliment, Mrs. Pritchard's stern expression faltered. "Well, yes, it was a significant undertaking. We had to organize 3 bake sales and a quilt raffle. The community is fortunate to have such dedicated organizers," Blake continued. "Miss Hayes has considerable experience with bookkeeping. Perhaps your committee could benefit from her expertise for future fundraising efforts." Willow stared at him in astonishment. He was not only defending her but suggesting a way she might integrate into the community. Mrs. Pritchard looked conflicted. Well, I suppose we could discuss it at our next meeting." "Excellent," Blake replied with a smile that somehow made it difficult for the older woman to regain her indignation. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Sunday dinner awaits." As they walked toward his waiting wagon, Willow whispered, "That was impressive maneuvering." "Politics of small towns," he replied with a wink. "Give people a way to accept you that lets them save face, and half your battle is won. And the other half, persistence," he said simply, "and a thick skin." The Grayson Ranch sprawled across several thousand acres of prime Utah grazing land. The main house was substantial without being ostentatious, a well-built 2-story structure with a wide porch and large windows that caught the afternoon light. Several outbuildings, a bunkhouse, and corrals completed the central compound. Martha Cooper immediately took Willow under her wing, showing her around the kitchen where Sunday dinner preparations were already underway. "The men handle the ranch, I handle the cooking," she explained cheerfully. "Though Blake's not half bad in the kitchen himself when he puts his mind to it." "Really?" Willow was surprised. Most men she'd known considered cooking beneath them. "His mother taught him," Martha explained, lowering her voice. "Before she died, I think he keeps up with it to honor her memory." As they worked together preparing the meal, Martha shared more about life at the ranch. Blake had inherited it from his father 15 years ago, transforming what had been a struggling operation into one of the most successful ranches in the territory. He was fair with his workers, progressive in his ranching methods, and respected even by his competitors. And since Sarah died, he's thrown himself completely into the ranch, Martha added. Hardly takes a day off, never goes to social gatherings unless business requires it. That sounds lonely, Willow observed, thinking of her own isolation. Martha nodded. James and I worry about him. A man needs more than work to sustain him. After a delicious dinner with the Coopers and several ranch hands, Blake showed Willow to a small office off the main living area. I thought you might be more comfortable working in here rather than the dining room with all the commotion. The room was simply furnished with a desk, bookshelves, and 2 comfortable chairs. A large window overlooked the pastures where cattle grazed in the distance. It's perfect, Willow said, settling at the desk and opening the ledgers she'd prepared the previous week. For the next 2 hours, she worked steadily while Blake occasionally checked in, bringing her fresh coffee and answering questions about various expenses. When she finally looked up, stretching her stiff shoulders, she was surprised to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. What? She asked self-consciously. Nothing, he replied, then seemed to reconsider. Actually, I was just thinking I've never seen someone so completely absorbed in numbers before. You look peaceful when you work. The observation was unexpectedly perceptive. I find order in numbers, she admitted. They're predictable, honest. They don't lie or judge or change the rules without warning. Unlike people, he added, understanding in his eyes. Unlike people, she agreed softly. Their gazes held for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, and Willow felt an unfamiliar flutter in her chest. She looked away first, gathering her papers with suddenly clumsy fingers. I should probably head back to my place before dark, she said, rising from the desk. Of course, I'll drive you. The ride back to her cabin was mostly silent, but it was a comfortable silence, broken only by occasional observations about the land they passed or the animals they spotted. When they arrived, Blake insisted on walking her to her door. Thank you for today, she said, standing on her porch in the fading light. For everything? Same time next week, he asked. She nodded, and he tipped his hat before returning to his wagon. Willow watched until he disappeared around the bend, aware that something had shifted between them, something subtle but undeniable. Inside her cabin, she lit a lamp and moved to the small mirror hanging on the wall. The woman who looked back at her seemed different somehow, her eyes brighter, her expression less guarded. For the first time in years, Willow allowed herself to wonder if perhaps her past didn't have to define her future after all. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Willow attended church on Sundays, gradually noting less hostility from the townspeople. She would then spend the afternoon at the Grayson ranch, working on the accounts and joining the extended ranch family for dinner. Occasionally, Blake would stop by her cabin during the week, bringing extra seedlings for her garden or offering advice on her fledgling farming efforts. Word spread through town that Miss Hayes was doing the bookkeeping for Grayson Ranch, and while some still whispered behind their hands, others began to reconsider their initial judgments. When Mrs. Pritchard reluctantly approached her after church to discuss the possibility of helping with the charity committee's accounts, Willow knew that Blake's strategy of patient integration was working. Her small farm began to flourish as well. The eastern slope he'd recommended proved ideal for vegetables, and she sold her first harvest of early lettuces and radishes at the town market in late May. Blake appeared as she was packing up her small stall, purchasing her last bunch of radishes for what she knew was far more than they were worth. I don't need your charity, she protested as he handed her the coins. It's not charity, he replied with that half-smile that had become increasingly familiar. It's an investment in the finest farmer in the territory. Despite herself, she smiled back. Flattery won't get you a discount, Mr. Grayson. Wasn't looking for one, Miss Hayes. He hesitated, then added, some of the ranchers and their families are having a picnic by the creek tomorrow, sort of a tradition before the summer work picks up. I thought you might like to join us. Willow tensed. Sunday dinners at his ranch were one thing, but a social gathering with other prominent families was entirely different. I don't think that would be wise. The Coopers will be there, and their children have been asking about you." His eyes held hers. "You can't hide on your farm forever, Willow." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made her heart skip. Still, she hesitated. "The other ranchers won't want me there." "Let me worry about that," he said confidently. "I'll pick you up at noon." Before she could protest further, he tipped his hat and walked away, leaving her both annoyed at his presumption and secretly pleased by the invitation. The following day, Willow dressed carefully in her blue calico dress, the nicest she owned, and pinned her dark hair up in a style that was neat without being too elaborate. When Blake arrived in his wagon, she was waiting on the porch, a basket of freshly baked cookies beside her. "I thought I should bring something," she explained as he helped her into the wagon. "You didn't need to, but I won't turn down your cookies," he replied with a grin. "Martha says you're a fine baker." The picnic was held in a lush meadow beside a creek that ran through several properties, including the edge of Blake's ranch. When they arrived, about a dozen families were already there, with quilts spread on the grass and children playing near the water. Willow felt the stares as Blake helped her down from the wagon, but to her surprise, Martha Cooper immediately hurried over to greet her, drawing her into conversation with several other ranchers' wives. While there was initial coolness from some, Martha's obvious acceptance made it difficult for the others to snub her outright. Blake, meanwhile, joined the men who were preparing to start a friendly shooting competition. Willow watched surreptitiously as he took his turn, hitting all 5 targets with confident ease. There was an athletic grace to him that she hadn't fully appreciated before, the way he moved with controlled strength, economical and precise. "He's quite something, isn't he?" said a voice beside her. Willow turned to find an elegant woman in her 50s observing her with knowing eyes. "I'm sorry," Willow replied, feeling her cheeks warm. "Blake," the woman clarified. "He's quite something to watch. I'm Elizabeth Thornton, by the way. My husband owns the Lazy Tea to the east of Blake's property." "Willow Hayes," she responded, extending her hand. I know who you are, dear," Elizabeth interrupted, taking her hand. "The whole county knows who you are by now." The mysterious woman with a past who's caught Blake Grayson's attention after 5 years of him showing interest in absolutely no one. Willow stiffened. "Mr. Grayson and I have a business arrangement. I do his bookkeeping." Elizabeth's laugh was kind rather than mocking. "Of course you do. And that's why he can't keep his eyes off you even while he's shooting. Come now, I've known Blake since he was a boy. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you, not even Sarah, God rest her soul." Flustered, Willow searched for a response, but she was saved by the arrival of the Cooper children, who begged her to join them by the creek to see the fish they'd discovered. Excusing herself, she gratefully followed the children, aware of Blake's gaze following her across the meadow. The afternoon passed more pleasantly than she had anticipated. While not everyone was welcoming, enough people treated her cordially that she began to relax. The children, of course, were indifferent to adult prejudices and delighted in showing her their discoveries and games. As the sun began its descent, someone produced a fiddle and impromptu dancing began in a cleared area of the meadow. Blake found her sitting with Martha, watching the dancers. "May I have this dance, Miss Hayes?" he asked, extending his hand. Willow hesitated. "I'm not very good at dancing." "Fortunately, I am," he replied with confidence that made Martha chuckle. "Trust me," the question seemed to encompass more than just dancing. Willow placed her hand in his, allowing him to lead her to the makeshift dance floor. He was indeed a good dancer, guiding her with subtle pressure from his hand at her waist, making the simple steps seem effortless. "Everyone's watching us," she murmured as they turned. "Let them," he replied, his voice low near her ear. "You look beautiful today, Willow." The compliment was unexpected, and she missed a step, causing him to tighten his hold slightly to steady her. "Sorry," she said. "I'm not used to compliments." His expression softened. "That's a shame. You deserve more of them." As they continued to dance, Willow became increasingly aware of the solid strength of his arm around her, the warmth of his hand holding hers, the way his eyes never left her face. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel the stirring of something that felt dangerously like hope. When the dance ended, Blake didn't immediately release her hand. "Would you like to walk down by the creek? It's cooler there." She nodded, and they slipped away from the crowd, following the path along the water until the sounds of the picnic faded behind them. They stopped beneath a large cottonwood tree, watching the water ripple over stones. "Thank you for convincing me to come today," Willow said. "It was nicer than I expected." "People will come around," Blake assured her. "Just give them time." "Why do you care?" she asked suddenly. "Why have you gone to such lengths to help me?" Blake was quiet for a long moment, gazing at the creek. Finally, he turned to face her fully. "When I first saw you in that saloon, standing tall despite how they were treating you, it reminded me of something my father told me before he died. He said the measure of a person isn't what mistakes they've made, but how they carry themselves afterward." He took a step closer. "You carry yourself with dignity, Willow Hayes, and courage and kindness." His voice dropped lower. "And I find myself thinking about you far more than is probably wise." Willow's heart pounded in her chest. "Blake, you don't need to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I know your priority is establishing yourself independently. I respect that. I just wanted you to know that my interest in you goes beyond neighborly concern." Before she could respond, shouts from the picnic area broke the moment. They turned to see people pointing at the sky, where dark clouds were gathering with unexpected speed. "Storm's coming," Blake said, his expression shifting to concern. "We should get back." The picnic dissolved quickly as families hurried to pack up before the rain hit. Blake helped Willow into the wagon just as the first fat droplets began to fall. By the time they reached her cabin, the storm had intensified, rain coming down in sheets that obscured the road ahead. "You can't drive back to your ranch in this," Willow shouted over the downpour as they ran for her porch. "The creek crossings will be dangerous." Blake nodded grimly, helping her inside and removing his dripping hat. "I'm sorry, I'll just wait on the porch until it lets up a bit." "Don't be ridiculous," she replied, lighting a lamp against the sudden darkness. "You'll catch your death out there." "The fire's nearly out, but I can build it back up." As she knelt to add wood to the embers, she was acutely aware of Blake's presence in her small cabin. The space that normally felt adequate for one person suddenly seemed intimate with him there, his broad shoulders making the room appear smaller. "Let me help," he said, kneeling beside her. Their hands brushed as they both reached for a log, and Willow felt that same strange flutter in her chest that seemed to occur whenever he was near. Once the fire was blazing again, she busied herself making coffee, grateful for the simple task to occupy her hands and mind. Blake stood by the window, watching the storm rage outside. "Looks like I may be here a while," he observed. "The creek will be overflowing by now." The implications of his words hung in the air between them. Propriety dictated that no unmarried man and woman should be alone together, especially overnight. If anyone in town discovered this situation, whatever progress she'd made toward respectability would be instantly destroyed. "I'm sorry," Blake said, reading her expression. "As soon as it's safe to travel, I'll go." "It's not your fault," she replied, handing him a cup of coffee. "No one can control the weather." They settled in chairs before the fire, the storm creating a strange bubble of isolation around the small cabin. Outside, the world was chaos. Inside, there was just the two of them, the crackling fire and conversations that meandered from ranch business to books they'd read to childhood memories. As evening deepened into night, the rain continued unabated. Willow brought out bread and cheese for a simple supper, which they ate by firelight. There was an ease between them now, comfortable silences interspersed with conversation that flowed naturally. "I should try to get some sleep," Willow finally said, stifling a yawn. "You can take the bed, I'll use the chair." Blake immediately shook his head. "Absolutely not, the chair is fine for me." After a brief, polite argument that Blake won, Willow retreated behind the privacy screen that separated her sleeping area from the main room. She changed quickly into her nightgown, then slipped beneath the quilt, acutely aware of Blake's presence on the other side of the screen. "Good night, Blake," she called softly. "Good night, Willow," came his reply, his deep voice somehow making her small cabin feel like home in a way it never had before. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the rain on the roof and the occasional shift of Blake in the chair. Just before sleep claimed her, a realization settled over her with quiet certainty. She was falling in love with Blake Grayson. And that was the most terrifying thing that had happened to her in years. Morning brought clear skies and birdsong. Willow woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of movement in her cabin. She dressed quickly behind the screen and emerged to find Blake at her small stove, cooking eggs. "Good morning," he greeted, looking remarkably fresh despite having spent the night in a chair. "Hope you don't mind." "Thought you might be hungry." "Not at all," she replied, trying to ignore how right he looked in her kitchen, how domestic this moment felt. "The storm's passed, I see." "Yes, but the creek's still high, I checked earlier, should be crossable by midday." He slid eggs onto 2 plates and brought them to the table. "I'm sorry about this situation. I know it could cause problems for you if anyone finds out." Willow sighed, sitting across from him. "People will talk regardless of what I do." At least this time, the gossip would be based on something that actually happened, even if nothing improper occurred. They ate in companionable silence, both aware that their time in this strange, intimate bubble was coming to an end. When they finished, Blake insisted on washing the dishes while Willow tended to her garden, which had benefited from the heavy rain. By mid-morning, Blake judged the creek low enough to cross safely. As he prepared to leave, he turned to Willow on the porch, his expression serious. "I want you to know that if anyone in town says anything inappropriate about last night, they'll answer to me," he said firmly. Willow shook her head. "I don't need you to fight my battles, Blake." "I know you don't need it," he replied with a small smile. "But I'd like to do it anyway, if you'll let me." There was something in his eyes that made her breath catch a tenderness and determination that spoke volumes. Acting on impulse, she reached up and placed a gentle kiss on his cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Blake's hand came up to touch the spot where her lips had been, surprise and pleasure mingling in his expression. "I'll see you Sunday?" he asked, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "Sunday," she confirmed, stepping back as he mounted his horse. As he rode away, Willow touched her fingertips to her lips, wondering at her own boldness and the feelings that had prompted it. Whatever was happening between them, she could no longer pretend it was simply friendship or a business arrangement, and that both thrilled and terrified her. The town was already buzzing with gossip by the time Willow ventured in for supplies 2 days later. Apparently, someone had seen Blake's horse tied outside her cabin early in the morning, and conclusions had been swiftly drawn. The whispers followed her through the general store, where the proprietor, Mr. Jenkins, was noticeably cooler than during her previous visit. "Will that be all, Miss Hayes?" he asked stiffly as he tallied her purchases. "Yes, thank you," she replied, maintaining her dignity despite the stares from other customers. As she paid for her goods, the bell above the door jangled, and Mrs. Pritchard entered with several members of her church committee. Her eyes narrowed when she spotted Willow. "Well, Miss Hayes," she said loudly, "I'm surprised to see you showing your face in town so soon after your indiscretion." Willow straightened her spine. "There was no indiscretion, Mrs. Pritchard. Mr. Grayson was caught in the storm and couldn't safely cross the creek to return to his ranch. He slept in a chair while I took the bed. Nothing improper occurred." Mrs. Pritchard's lips curved in a disbelieving smile. "Of course that's what you would say, but we all know your history, don't we?" "Once a woman has worked in a brothel, I was a piano player and bookkeeper," Willow interrupted, her patience finally snapping. "I never sold my body, though I don't judge those who had no other options. But even if I had been one of the girls, does that mean I deserve no chance at redemption? Does your Christian charity not extend to those who are trying to change their lives?" The store had gone completely silent, every eye on the confrontation. Mrs. Pritchard's face flushed an angry red. "How dare you lecture me on Christian charity? You've ensnared a respectable widower with your ways. Poor Sarah Grayson must be turning in her grave." The mention of Blake's late wife was a low blow, and Willow felt tears threatening. But before she could respond, another voice entered the fray. "That's quite enough, Alina." Elizabeth Thornton stood in the doorway, her elegant figure commanding attention. She moved to Willow's side, placing a supportive hand on her arm. "Blake Grayson is a grown man who makes his own choices," Elizabeth continued calmly. "And if he chooses to assist a neighbor during a storm, that speaks to his character, not Miss Hayes's. As for Sarah, I was her dear friend for many years, and I can assure you that she would be the first to defend someone being unfairly maligned. Mrs. Pritchard sputtered, unused to being contradicted by someone of Elizabeth's standing. "But her past is her past," Elizabeth finished firmly. "Judge not, lest ye be judged, Aliner. Isn't that what Pastor Williams preached just last Sunday?" With that, Elizabeth linked her arm through Willow's and guided her toward the door, pausing only for Mr. Jenkins to hastily bag Willow's purchases. Outside, Willow released a shaky breath. "Thank you, Mrs. Thornton. You didn't have to do that." "Elizabeth, please," the older woman corrected. "And yes, I did have to. I cannot abide self-righteous hypocrisy." She patted Willow's hand. "Besides, I've seen how Blake looks at you. Anyone who brings that light back to his eyes is a friend of mine." Willow blushed. "It's not what people think. We're just falling in love." Elizabeth suggested with a knowing smile. "My dear, I've been married for 30 years. I recognize the signs." She squeezed Willow's arm gently. "Don't let the Aliners of the world stand in the way of your happiness. They're simply jealous that you've captured the attention of the most eligible bachelor in the territory." With that parting wisdom, Elizabeth bid her good day and walked toward the milliner's shop, leaving Willow to consider her words. Was Blake falling in love with her? Was she brave enough to let him, knowing the obstacles they would face? That Sunday, Willow arrived at church to find the congregation unusually subdued. Blake was already there, and he immediately came to her side, his face grave. "I heard about what happened at the store," he said quietly as they took their usual seat in the back pew. "I'm sorry, it wasn't your fault," she replied, "and Elizabeth Thornton came to my defense. That seemed to make an impression." Blake smiled slightly. "Lizzie Thornton is a force of nature. If she's on your side, half the battle is won." Throughout the service, Willow was aware of varied reactions from the congregation. Some pointedly ignored her. Others offered tentative smiles, and a few, like Martha Cooper, made a special effort to greet her warmly. It seemed the community was divided on how to respond to the situation. After church, as they prepared to leave for the ranch, Pastor Williams approached them. He was a young man, new to Provo, with progressive ideas that sometimes clashed with the more conservative elements of his congregation. "Miss Hayes, Mr. Grayson," he greeted them. "I wonder if I might have a word." Blake tensed beside her, clearly prepared to defend her if necessary, but the pastor's expression was kind rather than condemning. "I wanted to apologize," he said, surprising them both. "Not for anything I've done, but for what others in this community have done. Christ taught us to welcome the stranger and show compassion to all, not to cast stones." Willow felt tears prick her eyes at this unexpected support. "Thank you, Pastor. That means a great deal." "I believe people can change," the young minister continued, "and I believe in second chances. My door is always open to you, Miss Hayes, should you need counsel or simply a friendly ear." As they drove to the ranch afterward, Willow found herself reflecting on how much had changed in the few months since she'd arrived in Provo. She had come seeking anonymity and a fresh start, expecting nothing more than to be left alone. Instead, she had found defenders, allies, and something she had never expected to find again: the possibility of love. At the ranch, she worked on the accounts while Blake attended to some urgent business with his foreman. When he returned to check on her progress, his expression was troubled. "Is something wrong?" she asked, setting aside her pen. He hesitated, then sat in the chair across from her. "There's talk of organizing a town meeting about us." Willow's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "Some of the more conservative elements in town led by Mrs. Pritchard, of course, are concerned about my association with you. They're framing it as concern for the moral fabric of the community." His jaw tightened in anger. "It's ridiculous. As if who I choose to spend time with is anyone's business but my own." "But it is affecting your business," Willow said quietly. "Isn't it?" He looked away, which was answer enough. It doesn't matter, they'll come around or they won't. I won't let them dictate my life. Blake, she said gently, reaching across the desk to touch his hand. I came here for a fresh start, but I never intended to cause problems for anyone else, especially not you. Perhaps it would be better if we didn't see each other for a while. His head snapped up, his eyes meeting hers with fierce intensity. Is that what you want? No, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But I don't want to be the reason your business suffers or your standing in the community is damaged. Blake turned his hand beneath hers, capturing her fingers in a warm grip. Willow, do you know why I never remarried after Sarah died? It wasn't just grief, though that was part of it. It was because I promised myself I wouldn't settle, that if I ever married again, it would be to someone who made me feel truly alive. He stood, still holding her hand, and moved around the desk until he was standing before her. You make me feel alive, Willow Hayes, and I don't give a damn what anyone in town thinks about that. Willow rose to meet him, her heart pounding. Blake, there are things about my past you don't know, things that might change how you feel. Tell me then, he said simply. I'm listening. And so she did. She told him about growing up in an orphanage in St. Louis, about being sent to work as a maid in a wealthy household at 15, about the son of the house who had taken advantage of her and then accused her of seduction when she became pregnant. She told him about being thrown out onto the street, about losing the baby to fever, about wandering west with nothing but grief and desperation. She told him about finding work at Madame Rosa's as a piano player, about keeping the books for the establishment, about the kindness the women there had shown her despite their own hard circumstances. And finally, she told him about saving every penny for 3 years, determined to buy land somewhere and build a life where no one knew her story. Throughout her tale, Blake listened without interruption, his expression grave but never judgmental. When she finished, tears streaming down her face, he gently wiped them away with his thumb. Thank you for trusting me with your story, he said softly. It doesn't change how I feel about you. If anything, it makes me admire your strength even more. You don't think less of me. She asked, hardly daring to believe it. Even knowing everything? Willow, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I think you're the bravest, most resilient person I've ever known, and I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Willow felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet, leaving her simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. Blake, she whispered, I'm afraid to hope, I'm afraid to trust. I'm afraid that if I let myself love you, it will all be taken away. I can't promise that nothing bad will ever happen, he replied, taking her hands in his. Life doesn't work that way, but I can promise that whatever comes, we'll face it together, if you'll have me. Instead of answering with words, Willow rose on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but quickly deepened as years of loneliness and longing gave way to the joy of connection. Blake's arms encircled her, drawing her closer, and for the first time in her adult life, Willow felt truly safe. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Blake rested his forehead against hers. I'll take that as a yes, he murmured with a smile she could feel rather than see. It's a yes, she confirmed, her heart too full for more elaborate words. The sound of the front door opening broke the moment, and they stepped apart just as Martha Cooper entered the room with a tray of coffee. Oh, Martha exclaimed, taking in their flushed faces and clasped hands. A knowing smile spread across her face. I'll just leave this here, shall I? She set down the tray and backed toward the door. Take your time, no rush at all. After she left, Blake chuckled. Well, the entire ranch will know within the hour, and the town by tomorrow, Willow added, but to her surprise, the thought didn't fill her with dread. What do we do now? Blake's expression grew serious. Now we decide how we want to handle this. I know you value your independence, and I respect that. We can take things as slowly as you need. Willow considered this. What about the town meeting, the gossip? Let them talk, he said firmly. I won't hide how I feel about you, Willow, but I also won't push you into anything you're not ready for. She thought about all she had endured to get to this point, the hardship, the judgment, the lonely determination to forge a new path. And she realized that while independence had been her goal, connection was what her soul truly craved. I don't want to hide either, she decided. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Isn't that what you said? The smile that transformed his face was worth any amount of gossip or disapproval. Together, he agreed, sealing the promise with another kiss. The town meeting was held the following Wednesday evening in the church hall. Blake and Willow arrived together, their entrance causing a momentary hush in the crowded room. They took seats near the front, refusing to hide in the shadows as if ashamed. Mayor Thompson, a portly man with political aspirations beyond Provo, called the meeting to order. We're here tonight to discuss concerns that have been raised about certain moral issues in our community, he began diplomatically. Mrs. Pritchard immediately rose. Let's not mince words, Mayor. We're here because Blake Grayson, one of our most prominent citizens, is carrying on with a woman of questionable virtue, setting a terrible example for the community. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some agreeing, others uncomfortable with the directness of the attack. Miss Hayes has a name, Eleanor, Blake said calmly, standing to address the room, and she's sitting right here. If you have accusations to make, at least have the courtesy to make them to her face. Mrs. Pritchard's cheeks flushed. Very well, Miss Hayes, your presence in this town, and particularly your relationship with Mr. Grayson, is causing significant concern among respectable families. Children are asking questions about your past. Young women are getting ideas about what kind of behavior is acceptable. What exactly is my behavior that you find so objectionable, Mrs. Pritchard? Willow asked, rising to stand beside Blake. Working hard on my farm. Keeping honest accounts for Mr. Grayson's ranch. Attending church every Sunday. Or is it simply that I existed in the world before coming to Provo, and not all of that existence meets with your approval? Before Mrs. Pritchard could respond, Pastor Williams stood. If I may speak, he said, his young voice carrying surprising authority. The Bible teaches us that there is joy before the angels of God over one sinner who repents. If Miss Hayes has sought to change her life, and all evidence suggests she is, then shouldn't we, as Christians, welcome that change rather than condemn her for past mistakes? Hear, hear, called out James Cooper from the back of the room, with several other ranch hands voicing agreement. Mrs. Pritchard was not so easily dissuaded. That's all very well, Pastor, but there are standards of propriety to maintain. Mr. Grayson spent the night at her cabin, unchaperoned, during a dangerous storm, Blake countered, his patience clearly wearing thin. Would you have preferred I risked my life crossing a flooded creek? You could have stayed with the Hendersons, Mrs. Pritchard retorted. Their farm is closer to town than Miss Hayes's cabin. The Hendersons' roof leaks worse than mine did before Blake fixed it, Willow pointed out, drawing unexpected laughter from parts of the crowd. Elizabeth Thornton rose next, her aristocratic bearing commanding attention. I've listened to enough of this nonsense, she declared. Blake Grayson is a grown man who has contributed more to this community than perhaps anyone in this room. Miss Hayes has shown nothing but industry and decorum since arriving in Provo. Their private affairs are exactly that, private. She turned to face Mrs. Pritchard directly. And if we're going to start examining everyone's past indiscretions, Eleanor, perhaps we should discuss that incident with the traveling salesman 3 summers ago that your husband still doesn't know about. A shocked gasp rippled through the room, and Mrs. Pritchard's face drained of color. That's completely different and untrue, is it? Elizabeth asked mildly. How convenient that we're willing to believe rumors about Miss Hayes but not about pillars of the community. Mayor Thompson, sensing that the meeting was rapidly spinning out of his control, attempted to restore order. Ladies and gentlemen, please, let's remember why we came together tonight to address concerns about community standards. I'd like to say something about that if I may, Blake said, his deep voice cutting through the commotion. When the room quieted, he continued. I understand that change can be unsettling and that traditions and standards matter. But I would ask each of you to consider what standards we truly want to uphold in Provo. Do we want to be a community that judges people based on rumors and past mistakes, or one that values redemption and second chances? He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of those he'd known for years. Many of you came west for a fresh start, just as Miss Hayes did. Many of you have pasts that you'd prefer not to have publicly examined. All I'm asking is that you extend to her the same courtesy you'd want extended to yourselves. There was a long moment of silence as his words sank in. Then Martha Cooper stood, her plain face flushed with emotion. "I was 16 when I came west with nothing but the clothes on my back and a baby on the way," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "My family had disowned me. The father denied the child was his. James took me in, married me, raised William as his own. If he had judged me by my past, where would I be now?" One by one, others rose to speak of mistakes made and forgiven, of second chances received, of judgments unfairly rendered. Not everyone was swayed, but as the meeting progressed, it became clear that the tide of public opinion was shifting. Finally, Mayor Thompson called for a vote on a resolution to support the right of all citizens to private lives free from public interference, provided no laws are broken. The measure passed by a comfortable margin, effectively ending the organized opposition to Willow and Blake's relationship. As people filed out of the hall afterward, many stopped to speak with them, some offering apologies, others simply extending tentative acceptance. Mrs. Pritchard swept past without a word, her rigid back expressing her displeasure more eloquently than words could have. "Well," Blake said when they were finally alone, "that went better than I expected." Willow laughed, the tension of the evening releasing in the sound. "I thought Elizabeth Thornton might actually strike Mrs. Pritchard at one point. Lizzie's always been formidable," Blake agreed with a grin. "Remind me never to get on her bad side." They stepped out into the cool evening air, Blake's hand finding hers as they walked toward his waiting wagon. "What happens now?" Willow asked, the question encompassing far more than just their immediate plans. Blake stopped, turning to face her under the starlit sky. "Now, Willow Hayes, I'd like to court you properly, if you'll allow it." "Court me," she repeated, a smile tugging at her lips. "That sounds very formal." "Well, I am trying to be respectable," he replied with mock seriousness. "For your sake, of course," she agreed, matching his tone. "And what would this courtship entail?" His expression softened. "Dinners at the hotel restaurant. Picnics by the creek when the weather's fine. Accompanying you to social gatherings if you're willing to attend them. Getting to know each other better day by day." "And the eventual goal of this courtship?" she asked, her heart beating faster. Blake took both her hands in his eyes sincere in the lamplight spilling from the church hall. "The goal, Willow, is to convince you to marry me. Not today, not tomorrow, but when you're ready, when you're certain that I love you for exactly who you are, past and all." The simplicity and honesty of his declaration brought tears to her eyes. "I might not need much convincing," she admitted softly. "Even so," he replied, bringing her hand to his lips for a gentle kiss, "I intend to do this right. You deserve to be properly courted, Willow Hayes." As they rode back to her cabin beneath the vast Utah sky, Willow felt as though a weight she'd carried for years had finally lifted. The future stretched before them, not without challenges, but filled with possibilities she had never dared to imagine. True to his word, Blake courted her with patience and attention over the following months. They dined at the hotel restaurant, rode across the ranch lands together, and attended social gatherings where, gradually, Willow was accepted into the community. She continued to work on her small farm, selling vegetables at the market and building a reputation for quality produce. By autumn, she had been invited to join the church's charitable committee, ironically at Mrs. Pritchard's suggestion, as the older woman had grudgingly recognized Willow's skill with accounts. The Harvest Festival in October saw Willow's apple pies win first prize, a public acknowledgement that she was now considered part of Provo's social fabric. Through it all, her feelings for Blake deepened from tentative attraction to profound love. She came to know the man behind the respected rancher, his dry humor, his occasional stubbornness, his unwavering sense of justice, and the tender heart he kept hidden beneath a stoic exterior. On a crisp November evening, Blake invited her to dinner at his ranch house, unusual, as they typically dined with the Coopers or in town to avoid impropriety. When she arrived, she found the house transformed with lanterns and flowers, the dining table set for two with his best china. "What's the occasion?" she asked as he took her wrap. "6 months since the day we met," he replied, leading her to the table. "I thought it deserved a celebration." Over a delicious dinner that he admitted Martha had helped him prepare, they talked and laughed with the easy companionship that had become characteristic of their relationship. When they finished eating, Blake seemed suddenly nervous, fidgeting with his napkin in a way that was unlike him. "Blake, is everything all right?" He took a deep breath. "Willow, these past months have been the happiest of my life since Sarah died. Actually, they've been a different kind of happiness that I never expected to find again." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I know I said I'd wait until you were ready, and if you're not, I understand. But I can't wait any longer to ask." Rising from his chair, he came to kneel beside hers, opening the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a single perfect diamond. "Willow Hayes, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of building a life with me that leaves the past behind and looks only toward the future we create together?" Tears blurred her vision as she looked at this man who had become everything to her friend, defender, partner, love. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Blake, I will marry you." His face broke into a smile of such joy that it took her breath away. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into a kiss that sealed their promise to each other. They were married in the church on Christmas Eve, with Pastor Williams officiating and nearly the entire town in attendance. Willow wore a simple gown of ivory satin, while Blake cut a handsome figure in his best suit. Martha Cooper stood as Willow's matron of honor, and James served as Blake's best man. Even Mrs. Pritchard attended, offering stiff congratulations at the reception afterward. "He could have done worse, I suppose," she conceded, which from her was practically a blessing. Elizabeth Thornton kissed Willow's cheek and whispered, "Sarah would have approved, my dear. She wanted nothing more than for Blake to find happiness again." Their honeymoon was a week in Salt Lake City, staying in the finest hotel and attending the theater luxuries Willow had never experienced. But the greatest luxury was waking each morning in Blake's arms, secure in the knowledge that she was loved completely, past and all. When they returned to Provo, Willow moved into the ranch house, which already felt more like home than anywhere she had ever lived. Her small cabin became a guest house, and her vegetable garden expanded into a larger operation that supplied not only their household, but also brought in a tidy profit at the market. Life settled into a rhythm of shared work and shared joy. Blake taught Willow to ride better than she ever had before, and she introduced him to the pleasure of reading poetry before the fire on winter evenings. They argued occasionally. She was stubborn, and he could be overprotective, but they always found their way back to each other, stronger for having navigated the disagreement. Spring arrived with new calves on the ranch and new possibilities for them as a couple. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Utah sky in shades of gold and crimson, Willow turned to her husband with news she had been saving for the perfect moment. "Blake," she said, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach, "we're going to have a baby." The wonder that spread across his face was everything she had hoped for. "A baby, you're sure?" she nodded, tears of happiness shimmering in her eyes. "Doctor Phillips confirmed it yesterday. He says the baby should arrive in late October." Blake gathered her into his arms, his embrace gentle as if she had suddenly become fragile. "Willow," he whispered against her hair, "you've given me back everything I thought I'd lost: a family, a future hope." He pulled back to look into her eyes. "I love you more than I have words to tell you." "You don't need words," she replied softly. "You show me every day." As they sat together watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Willow reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From an orphaned child to a desperate young woman, from a piano player in a brothel to a respectable rancher's wife, expecting their first child, her life had been shaped by both tragedy and triumph. And through it all, the greatest triumph had been finding the courage to love and be loved, to trust that the past didn't have to determine the future, to believe that second chances were not just possible but precious beyond measure. Their son, Benjamin James Grayson, was born on a perfect autumn day with his father's strong features and his mother's dark hair. As Willow held him for the first time, Blake beside her with tears in his eyes, she knew that the circle of healing was complete. Where once there had been loss and loneliness, now there was family and belonging. 2 years later, their daughter, Sarah Elizabeth, joined the family, followed by another son, Thomas, 18 months after that. The Grayson ranch flourished, as did their children, growing strong in the love that surrounded them. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Blake surprised Willow with a new piano for the ranch house, a grand instrument shipped all the way from Boston. "So you can teach our children," he explained. "And so you never forget that music brought you through the darkest times." That night, after the children were asleep, Willow played for Blake as she had once played in Madame Rosa's, her fingers remembering the melodies that had been her sole comfort in those difficult years. But now the music was transformed, no longer an escape from a painful reality, but a celebration of the life they had built together. As the last notes faded, Blake drew her to her feet and into his arms. "10 years ago, you walked into a saloon and everyone else saw a woman with a past," he murmured, "but I looked up and saw my future." Willow rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, "And I saw a man brave enough to choose me when no one else would." "Best choice I ever made," he assured her, his arms tightening around her. Outside, the stars shone down on the ranch house where a family slept in peace, on the land that had witnessed their journey from strangers to lovers to partners in life's greatest adventure. And in that moment, as in countless moments before and countless yet to come, Willow knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be chosen, cherished, and finally, irrevocably home.